Hello and welcome to This Really Happened, a place where unbelievable, heart-touching true stories come to life. Sometimes surprising, sometimes bittersweet, always real. Grab a drink and settle in. We're about to begin. Along a dusty, narrow street leading into the small provincial town of Willow Creek, Nicholas walked unhurriedly. A business trip had brought him here from afar, first a plane to the regional centre, then a long journey by commuter train. The journey had been tiring, but Nicholas didn't complain. He had loved to travel since childhood, and every business trip seemed like a new adventure to him. Usually, his visits were connected with large cities, as the company where he worked as chief economist owned an extensive network of household appliance stores. This thriving firm was constantly expanding, opening more and more new branches across the country. And so Nicholas arrived in Willow Creek to finalize the formalities associated with the appearance of another retail outlet of their network here. Everything went smoothly, matters settled, documents signed. Nicholas routinely handled such tasks, feeling confident. Tomorrow morning, the return journey lay ahead, a commuter train to the regional city, and then a plane home to his native capital city. The head office of the large company was located there, and it was a very convenient arrangement. The evening was free, and Nicholas decided to take a walk around the town to look around. He wanted to find a cozy cafe, sit there for a bit, and enjoy the atmosphere. Willow Creek seemed quiet and peaceful to him, with a measured, established way of life. Surely everyone here knew each other, and neighbourliness had not yet become an empty sound, as in big cities. He could almost physically feel how, turning into one of the courtyards, he would see scenes from the past. Old women on benches, children in the sandbox, men fixing cars, women chatting by the entrances. All this vividly reminded Nicholas of his own childhood. Every summer, for at least a couple of weeks, his mother would send him to his father's parents in a large village. His mother and father divorced when Nicholas was very young, and he didn't remember the details. His mother harboured resentment, believing that her husband had left her for another woman. With her, his father had moved to Seaport, where her parents lived. "He couldn't leave her parents, but he abandoned us," his mother would exclaim, recalling the difficult times. Nicholas found it unpleasant to hear such words about his father, but he indeed showed no interest in his life. In Seaport, his father had other children, Nicholas's half-brother and half-sister. Apparently he had enough heirs and wasn't drawn to his firstborn. Perhaps the new wife was against their communication. His father paid alimony regularly, but never called or wished his son a happy birthday. His paternal grandmother and grandfather lived relatively nearby, 100 kilometers from capital city. They waited for their grandson every summer and were sincerely happy about his arrival. Nicholas's mother was wary of them, fearing they would turn her son against her. Therefore, Nick stayed with them only for a week or two a year during the summer holidays. And those were the happiest days. His grandmother and grandfather surrounded him with warmth, love, and care, focusing all their attention on their grandson. Delicious lunches, fishing with his grandfather, sleeping in a tent, swimming in the river with the local kids. Nicholas dreamed of spending the entire summer with them. He knew they would have been happy to have him, but he had to be content with little. Neither his grandmother nor grandfather ever spoke ill of Nicholas's mother. On the contrary, they instilled in him that it was hard for her alone. But his mother often spoke unflatteringly about her in-laws. They couldn't raise their own child properly, never left the village their whole lives, speak ungrammatically. Such words he heard from her. Sometimes his grandmother and grandfather would tell their grandson about his father's childhood, funny stories like those from Billy's Tales. Nicholas laughed heartily at his parents' antics and sincerely didn't understand. How could such a guy, cheerful, brave, good at making friends, abandon his own son? Did he really not even think about him? Later, Nicholas learned that his father had tried to keep in touch. He called, sent postcards and toys. But his mother, out of resentment and a desire for revenge, didn't give him a chance. She herself told him about it when Nicholas had grown up and learned of his father's death. A heart attack took him, a man still quite young. Nicholas barely knew his father, but the feeling of irreparable loss weighed him down. He had always assumed they would meet someday, talk, and sort everything out. Now nothing could be fixed. It was over. Then, on that day, his mother spoke well of Nicholas's father for the first time. She told how he, an inexperienced young father, bathed the baby, got up with him at night, ran to the milk kitchen. And she also admitted about his father's attempts to communicate with his son. "I was so offended by him," his mother said, "and I thought nothing would work out. He's in Seaport, we're here. It's better not to know such a father at all than to break your heart." Nicholas forgave and understood his mother. He had always felt sorry for her. She raised him alone, dedicated her whole life to him, and didn't marry a second time. Thanks to her efforts, Nicholas became a successful and wealthy man. From an early age, his mother instilled in her son the necessity of higher education. She herself had finished vocational school and worked as a seamstress all her life, often taking orders at home. Nicholas liked to listen to the hum of the sewing machine and watch a beautiful item being born from a piece of fabric. His mother seemed like a sorceress to him, and her work brought in a decent income. In childhood, Nicholas lacked nothing: fashionable clothes, toys, a bicycle, books, ice cream every day. They lived in a good apartment with comfortable furniture and appliances. There was even enough for decorative figurines. Once a year, they definitely went to the sea. Nicholas felt like a quite happy child. "Study hard," his mother instructed. "You'll study, become a big person, then we'll live well." The young man thought they were living well enough already, but he listened to his mother's words. He enjoyed studying and found it easy. He was almost an A student without much effort. Student life captivated him completely. He met interesting people. Parties, trips, joint preparation for exams. Life resembled a colourful carousel. Nicholas felt happy. He was in his element. His mother was a little scared by these parties. She often warned her son against rash actions. "Be careful, son. It's easy to lose everything," she said. "A wonderful future awaits you, but it's very easy to spoil everything." This was followed by lectures on the dangers of alcohol, the risk of getting into trouble, or getting involved with greedy girls dreaming of hooking a promising young man. Nicholas was amused by these maternal fears. He controlled himself perfectly. He tried to explain to her that he had a head on his shoulders, but she couldn't understand that her son had grown up. It always seemed to her that she had to protect him, cushion his falls. Remembering his student years, Nicholas smiled. His mother was the same now, still worrying, trying to arrange his life. Now her new obsession was that her son, a grown, established man approaching 40, was still unmarried. A mess. His mother persistently tried to set him up with daughters of her friends. Good girls from decent families. It was funny and awkward at the same time. Nicholas wasn't angry with his mother. He treated her concern with indulgence, understanding that she wished him the best in her understanding. He himself lived quite well as a bachelor. "You're only responsible for yourself. You do what you want, you don't report to anyone. But you couldn't explain that to his mother. Nicholas occasionally had brief romances. Some partners tried to hook him, but he harshly cut off such attempts and immediately ended the relationship. He didn't need a family. What if he wouldn't make a good husband and father? There were so many unhappy couples around, quarrels, divorces, suffering children. Once, many years ago, Nicholas was sure he had met the love of his life. The feelings were sincere and strong, the world was transformed, became brighter. And then, disappointment and physical pain. He didn't want to live. He barely pulled through thanks to his mother, who found a good psychotherapist. It was terrifying to think what might have happened without that professional. Nicholas no longer wanted such upheavals and consciously chose a life where work was the main focus. True, his mother couldn't reconcile herself to this. She wanted to see her son with a wife, surrounded by children. But never mind, she would get over it somehow. Nicholas himself didn't understand why these thoughts and memories suddenly flooded him. It all started when Willow Creek reminded him of his grandmother and grandfather, his father's parents. They were long gone, having passed away in the same year. His mother was indignant then that Nicholas's father hadn't even come to say goodbye, leaving the trouble to his brother. Only later did Nicholas learn that his father had serious financial problems and simply wouldn't have been able to get there from Seaport. But back then, his mother vividly described his parents' terrible act to her son, not holding back her words. Nicholas sighed. With years, he understood more clearly that his mother, beloved and loving, who had done everything for her son, put pressure on him. She shaped his opinion of relatives, moulded him to her liking. Because of this, in childhood and youth, he often felt confused, bewildered. But what was the point of talking about it now? He didn't hold a grudge, felt gratitude and pitied her. Not everyone is capable of laying down their entire life on the altar of their child's future happiness. His mother had to work hard, solve problems on her own. Nicholas understood this perfectly and, as an adult, called her every day, often visited, and gave gifts without occasion. He understood that the attention of her grown son and his conscious gratitude were vitally important to her. His feet carried Nicholas to the station square. In small towns, all roads lead to the station. It's not surprising. Well, he could have dinner somewhere here. Surely there would be a suitable cafe or canteen. For some reason, he craved home-style food, the kind you could only find in canteens. Just then, as if on cue, a sign caught his eye. Canteen. Nicholas walked quickly towards the establishment. He needed to cross the square with a fountain. By the fountain he was stopped by a trembling, dry and cracked voice. "Young man, it's awkward to ask, but there's no other way. Please help if you can." Nicholas turned around and saw an old woman, hunched, wrinkled, in an old faded dress, a colourful headscarf on her head, dusty, worn-out sneakers on her feet. But her eyes, the blue eyes clearly belonged to a woman not that old. They looked timid and guilty. Perhaps she was a beggar, the same age as his mother, just life had aged her. "Of course," the man nodded and reached into his pockets. Cash? He usually paid by card, but this time he found several 1,000-ruble bills. Without hesitation, he gave them to the woman because he saw her need, so much hope in her eyes. She didn't look like the brazen professional beggars. "Is this all for me?" The stranger was surprised, seeing the bills. "Yes," Nicholas nodded. "Oh, thank you, dear. God bless you for your generosity. I'm not asking for myself, you see." Nicholas wanted to move on, but he saw that it was important for the old woman to explain herself or justify herself. He wasn't in a hurry. Let her speak. It wasn't hard for him to listen. I have a grandson, Stevie. His mother, my daughter, died, so I'm raising him as best I can. There's not enough money. I can't work anymore. I've become old and sick. So I have to ask good people for help here at the station. Don't think I'm asking for drink, and I'm not lazy. I bent my back my whole life, worked as a cleaner. If it weren't for sickness, I'd still be working now, wouldn't be in need. But I can't. Only for Stevie's sake do I walk with an outstretched hand. He's growing. He needs to be fed well, dressed, educated. Ah, you have a hard fate. Nicholas shook his head. You're doing great not abandoning the boy. How old is he, Stevie? The old woman smiled. She was pleased to talk about her grandson. He's 12, handsome and smart, learns easily, a clear head, but he suffers because of our dire situation. He sees how hard it is for me and tries to earn some money, washes cars, mows lawns. He gets pennies, or sometimes nothing. People are different. Boys are often cheated, and he spends a lot of time, comes home tired, then he's no good for homework. So his studies are slipping. I tell him, study, Stephen. Your main job is studying. You don't need to work so much, I'll manage, and you need to study to get on your feet later. But he doesn't listen to me. He doesn't listen. He doesn't listen, Nicholas repeated. This story touched him somehow. The man wanted to know more about the life of the old woman and her grandson. Is it hard for you with him? No, what are you saying? The beggar woman threw up her hands. You misunderstood. Stevie is a very good boy. He takes care of me, does everything around the house. He only doesn't listen to me in that he keeps working. It's hard for him. My heart aches for him. Stevie should be in a good family. He's talented. He could make something of himself. And I'm afraid he'll ruin all his abilities with me. That's what I'm worried about. With these words, the old woman adjusted her headscarf. When she raised her hand, the sleeve of her calico dress pulled up, and Nicholas's eyes beheld a bracelet, a thin gold chain with 3 heart-shaped pendants. The man stared, stunned, at the exquisite piece. He was struck not by the fact of an expensive item, but by the fact that many years ago he had ordered exactly the same bracelet. He had ordered it at a jewellery workshop for the girl he considered his soulmate, with whom he wanted to live a long life. And she, this young beauty, had become the biggest disappointment in his life. There, on those heart pendants, their names were engraved, Nicholas and Sarah, and the 3rd heart was inlaid with a diamond. Nicholas had spent all his savings on the piece then. What was this? Just a similar bracelet? Or that very one? It wasn't hard to find out, but it felt strange, almost scary. The old woman caught Nicholas's gaze and smiled. I know what you're thinking. She pretends to be a beggar, but she's wearing gold. But you're mistaken. This is a memory of my daughter. In the hardest times, I couldn't part with this item. Sally loved this bracelet so much, it meant a lot to her. That's why I haven't taken it off since that terrible day, since Sarah... Nicholas felt as if he had been doused with ice water. His heart first constricted, then beat faster, pounding in his temples. Sarah. The girl Nicholas wanted to build a life with, for whom he had ordered the bracelet, was named Sarah. Could it be? No, it just couldn't be. Do you have time now? Nicholas asked. Yes, the old woman replied, looking at the man suspiciously. First he had easily given her a large sum of money, and now he was acting strange. We need to talk, Nicholas said. I think I once knew your daughter. This bracelet. And her name. Everything fits. Maybe we can sit down. All right, the old woman nodded and headed towards an empty bench in front of the fountain. Nicholas trailed after her. Nicholas met Sarah before his final year, during summer work practice at the university. The building had just been renovated, and the students were cleaning the corridors along with a professional crew. Sarah was part of this crew, a fragile, big-eyed girl. Nicholas immediately noticed her, cheerful, pure, bright. There was something captivating in her gaze. The young man constantly tried to catch her eye, and when he succeeded, Sarah would blush and lower her lashes. Nicholas felt happy. His heart fluttered sweetly every time he was near her. It was surprising that no one else noticed her beauty. Even Tony, the local Don Juan, paid no attention to Sarah. Well, all the better. Nicholas didn't want Sarah to become one of his trophies. Seeing Sarah dragging a heavy bucket of water, Nicholas dropped everything and was by her side. "Give that here." He snatched the heavy load from her delicate hands. "Where do you need it?" "To the second floor." The girl didn't argue. They talked on the way. Sarah turned out to be simple and modest. It was easy and pleasant to talk to her. She too seemed to like the handsome, smiling young man. The students' work practice lasted a couple of hours. The renovation crew worked a full day. On the day they met, Nicholas stayed with Sarah, helping her until the end of her shift, not wanting to part. After work, they went to the cinema. Nicholas held her hand in his and knew that his life was taking a serious turn. Never had another person meant so much to him. Nicholas and Sarah started dating. Gradually, they became close, getting to know each other better. Both were raised without fathers. Sarah had never known hers at all and didn't seem to mind. Both had only mothers. But while Nicholas's mother did everything for his education and prosperous life, Sarah's mother didn't have that opportunity. She worked as a cleaner, earning pennies. Sarah helped her from an early age. After the 9th grade, the girl went to a construction technical school. She didn't dream of higher education. "I need to work. Money is needed," she said. After finishing technical school, she got a job with the renovation crew. Now there was more money in their small family, which was good, as they had to rent an apartment. They didn't have their own place, and prices were rising. Nicholas was sure they would get married. He saw no other destiny for himself. Sarah was completely his person, sensitive, kind, fragile. He wanted to protect and cherish her. She had a hard job, but when they got married, she wouldn't do that anymore. Nicholas would have a good profession, a high-paying job. He would be able to fully support the family. Sarah could do whatever she wanted, take care of the house, the family, or go back to school. Of course, Nicholas shared his thoughts with his mother. He was used to telling her everything. "Have you lost your mind?" His parent was horrified. "How many times have I told you? You're a boy from a well-off family, a student of a prestigious university with prospects. We have a big apartment. Do you even realize that girls from poor families hunt for guys like you? Do you know how many women want to ride into a comfortable life on someone else's back?" "No, Mom, Sarah, she's completely different. You'll understand everything when you meet her." "You don't understand much. There will be tons of Sarahs instead of these Sarahs. What wedding? You need another girl from a good family with a higher education. And these out-of-towners, they only want one thing. They'll have a child with a good guy, and then, manipulating the child, they'll twist him around their finger." No matter how Nicholas tried to convey to his mother that Sarah was different, she wouldn't listen. In the end, the young man decided, whatever happens, happens. Even if his mother didn't agree, he would do it his way. True, the wedding would have to be postponed. His mother would never agree to him bringing his wife into their apartment. She was set against Sarah. Living together with his mother and Sarah would lead to nothing good. There was only one way out: get on his feet as quickly as possible, earn money for a separate place, and only then propose to his beloved. Nicholas couldn't imagine life without Sarah. Beside her, he felt strong, almost omnipotent, and at the same time very vulnerable. His heart belonged to Sarah. She could do whatever she wanted with him. But the girl treated him gently, cared for him, tried to make him laugh. When Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, he felt like the happiest person in the world. The offer of an internship abroad came unexpectedly. Nicholas was finishing his diploma. Graduation was close. Finally, he would have his diploma. He could work, earn money. Nicholas planned to immediately save up for housing. Even a small apartment in an old building, the main thing was a place where he and Sarah would start their family life. A quiet, calm, measured, and happy one. One day, the rector summoned Nicholas. It turned out that a foreign partner was offering the university a profitable contract. They needed capable graduates, students. He would have to spend 3 years in a foreign country and work hard, but the salary offered was something a young specialist couldn't find in the city. Nicholas immediately calculated this money would be enough for a very decent apartment. And experience abroad would increase his demand. Upon returning, he would easily find a high-paying job. Of course, the young man gladly agreed. True, he would have to part with Sarah for 3 long years. They wouldn't see each other, could barely communicate, only through correspondence. 3 years, a monstrous term. On the other hand, it was the only chance to get on his feet quickly. He had to endure, survive the separation. This was a real test of feelings. Nicholas was sure they would both pass it with dignity. Sarah was upset when she learned about her beloved's plans, even cried, but she understood. It was the only way out of their difficult situation. Before leaving, Nicholas wanted to give her a special gift, something memorable. He went to a jewellery workshop, decided to order an exclusive piece. Together with the master, they chose a bracelet, elegant, fragile, like Sarah, with original heart pendants, with engraving. On 2 hearts, he asked to engrave their names. The third the master decorated with a diamond. The sum for materials and work amounted to all of Nicholas's savings. But the young man parted with them without regret. The bracelet was ready in a week. Seeing it, Nicholas sincerely admired it. It was exactly what he wanted, a piece with meaning and special energy. Sarah's eyes lit up with joy at the sight of the gift. True, she immediately became shy. It must be incredibly expensive. A gold piece, custom work. You deserve the best of everything, Nicholas smiled, and you'll have it all when I return. Let the bracelet remind you of me in my absence and make you happy. I won't take it off at all, Sarah promised, and hugged her beloved. His mother, unlike Sarah, received the news of the internship with joy. See how smart you are, she smiled proudly. You were the one offered the internship. That means they value you, and the trip will be good for you. You'll get that poor little bride out of your head, and your head will be straight. Nicholas didn't argue. No, he wouldn't forget his beloved for a minute. The entire internship was only for her. Without the trip, they wouldn't get their own place so quickly. And this way, Nicholas would soon be independent, ready to start a family. For happiness, he had to work hard. And Nicholas worked, sweating profusely. It was difficult, complex financial reports, language barrier, learning everything anew, but he managed. He had a goal, and he was walking towards it with a confident step. He often called his mother, dialing her from the office or hotel. She was happy about the calls, showered him with compliments and questions. But with Sarah, he had to correspond. She didn't have a landline phone. There was nowhere to call. He missed her voice so much, he started to feel the longing almost immediately. The correspondence didn't last long either. After a couple of months, letters from the girl stopped coming. Nicholas himself wrote almost every week. But did Sarah receive his messages? Probably not, otherwise she would have replied. "Mum, do you know what happened?" he wondered in conversation with his parent. "Do you know why Sarah isn't answering letters?" "How should I know?" his mother replied reluctantly. "Maybe your flighty girl went off with someone? They're like that." "You're not telling me something. I'll drop everything and fly home tomorrow. I need to make sure she's okay." "Don't you dare!" His mother was frightened. "She's fine. She's waiting for you. It's just that international mail is a mess right now. Temporary problems. That's why the letters aren't getting through. So don't worry. Just work calmly." It was hard to live these years without any contact with his beloved. His mother spoke reluctantly about Sarah, preferring to change the subject. When her son insisted, she would report, everything was fine, Sarah was alive and well, working. Nicholas often asked to arrange a phone call. He wanted to hear her familiar voice, but his parent was adamant. "There will be no Sarahs in my house," she replied. Nicholas was angry but understood that his mother had the right to say that. It was her apartment, and she wasn't obliged to let in someone she couldn't stand. Nicholas had no doubt, when he returned and married Sarah, his mother would have to meet her. And then his mother would understand what a wonderful person Sarah was. She would accept her, change her mind. And so it would be, the sooner the better. The 3 years of internship, on the one hand, flew by quickly. Nicholas had a lot of work, complex and interesting tasks. This was engaging and brought in good money. On the other hand, 3 years without his beloved seemed like an eternity. He missed her voice, her eyes, her scent, her touch. She appeared in his dreams, in the girls he met. Nicholas didn't look at anyone else during this time. Although there were options, many young female colleagues, not against starting a relationship. But he only thought about Sarah. No one else was needed. His mother, by the way, hoped her son would find a decent girl there. She often asked if someone had appeared. He had to disappoint her every time. Why would he need someone else? Sarah, she was his destiny. The internship time was nearing its end. Nicholas had enough funds in his account for a very good apartment in Capital City, and there was even money left for a car. In the week before his departure, he wandered through supermarkets, choosing gifts for Sarah. A beautiful dress, unusual jewelry, toys. It was pleasant to guess what would bring joy to his beloved. His mother met him at the airport. In 3 years, she had changed a lot. She had put on weight, there were more wrinkles, more grey hair. Nicholas was happy to see his loved one. Mother and son hugged tightly and went home. "You've grown up so much," his mother didn't take her eyes off him. "You've become a real man, so handsome, so tall." Nicholas smiled. He felt the same way. Youth was behind him. He had become completely adult, ready to start a family. They didn't talk about Sarah anymore. What for? Any mention of her always irritated his parent. The young man was in a hurry to get home. The sooner he could leave his things, take a shower, and run to her, to Sarah. Surely she wasn't home now. The day was in full swing. She was at work. Then he would ask her mother where to find the girl. Nicholas couldn't wait until the end of the workday. He had dreamed of this meeting for 3 whole years. He needed to see her, hear her beloved voice, look into her dear eyes. "Going to her, are you?" his mother asked when he was at the door. The young man didn't deny it. To her. "Well, good luck," his parent curled her lips contemptuously. Nicholas had never been to Sarah's home, but he knew the address well. He had walked her to her building many times. The girl lived on Factory Street, in a former barracks. It was a 2-story, leaning wooden building. The disadvantaged area had become even more dilapidated over these 3 years. Piles of garbage, dusty roads, overgrown weeds. Nicholas climbed the creaking stairs to the 2nd floor. Here was the right door. First, he rang the doorbell, but it didn't work, so he knocked decisively. The door opened after a couple of minutes. On the threshold stood an elderly man in a greasy robe with a sharp, unkind gaze and patchy grey hair. Who was this? Sarah had said she lived with her mother. "Good day," Nicholas greeted politely. "I'd like to speak with one of the residents of the apartment." "He's right in front of you, in person," the man smiled proudly. "What did you want to talk about? I won't invite you in. My grandchildren are here now. They're sleeping. I wouldn't want to wake them." Of course," Nicholas agreed hastily. An elderly man? Grandchildren? Maybe he had the wrong door? "Well, what's the matter?" The man waited, starting to lose patience. "You see, I'm looking for my girlfriend, Sarah. I must have the wrong apartment, but she definitely lives somewhere nearby. Could you tell me? Your neighbours, apparently. Sarah?" The man shook his head. "Sarah and Val, her mother? Yes, they used to live here. But they moved away somewhere, in a hurry. This is my apartment after all. They rented it from me. I don't know why they suddenly packed up so unexpectedly, as if they were running from someone. Well, it was convenient for me. My son had children born, twins. So they moved here. This apartment is more spacious. They left." "And you don't happen to know where and why?" "No, they didn't report to me, and I didn't ask. I don't need extra information. I'm not used to prying into people's lives. The mother and daughter packed their things in one evening, paid up, and that was it. From their conversation, I understood they were going to another city somewhere. Which one, I don't know." Nicholas then understood that he had lost Sarah, lost her forever, but he didn't give up immediately. He started a whole investigation. He went to her former workplace, found her friends, talked to them. They knew nothing about where they had gone. Sarah hadn't talked about her plans. "Sal became strange then, long before she left," shared Lisa, Sarah's colleague and friend. "At first she was very sad when you left. Then suddenly she became joyful. She was glowing from within. We thought, did she fall in love again? But she denied it. Something was definitely happening with her. I know her well. Then something happened again. Sal was pale, frightened, confused. I tried to find out what was wrong, if I could help. I felt sorry for her. But you couldn't pull a word out of her with tongs. And then suddenly this departure. Nothing is clear with her." Having found out nothing from Sarah's acquaintances, Nicholas went to the police with a missing person report. They just laughed at him there. They explained that Sarah and her mother were adults and could move freely. "Maybe she ran away from you?" A young man in uniform smirked. "She doesn't want to communicate anymore, and you don't understand words, so she left. It happens. You're not a relative of mine. I can't accept the report. There are no grounds." After some time, Nicholas lost hope. He understood that he would never find Sarah in the vast expanse of the country. They had never had their own place. They could have gone to any city. Searching for them was like looking for a needle in a haystack. But why? Why did Sarah do this? Did she fall out of love and run away? Or did something happen? But what did it matter now? It was clear they would never see each other again. And then the young man fell into despair. While he was running around the city, searching, hoping, it seemed to him that everything was fixable. But now Nicholas knew Sarah had disappeared forever. His plans for a wedding children, a long life were not destined to come true. What was the internship for? What was he saving money for? Why did he leave at all? Nicholas suddenly realized that he didn't want to live at all. What was the point? Sarah wasn't there anyway, and she wouldn't be. He pondered the reasons for her disappearance from morning till night. He lay in his room, the door closed, listening to sad music and thinking. Maybe Lise was right. Sarah met someone else, or couldn't wait that long and left to find a new life. In any case, she easily erased him from her destiny. She didn't even leave a note. She could have sent it through Lisa or through his mother, his almost mother-in-law. Did that mean Nicholas meant nothing to her? Sarah was his whole world, the meaning of his life, and he was just an acquaintance to her, someone pleasant to spend time with. He didn't want to live. Nicholas ate almost nothing, didn't answer calls, didn't talk to his worried mother. "Why are you suffering?" she asked. "Well, the girl didn't wait. It happens. She has her own life. You have yours. This is a normal situation, and you're making a tragedy out of it." Perhaps his mother wanted to ease his condition, but her lamentations made it even harder. Mom. She didn't understand anything. She couldn't see into his heart. And there was so much pain, despair, and hopelessness that Nicholas couldn't imagine how to live with it. In the end, his mother found him a psychotherapist. This happened after he refused food for 2 days. She couldn't make him eat. Then she became truly frightened, afraid that her son would die. A short, elderly man in simple clothes came to them. He was just over 50, with distinguished grey hair and horn-rimmed glasses. His mother had called the specialist to the house, understanding that her son wouldn't go to a clinic. Nicholas had no idea how much effort and money it cost his mother to arrange this visit. This man, he just sat nearby and said something in a low voice. Nicholas didn't listen at first, then became interested. The psychotherapist somehow miraculously helped him. Apparently, he was a professional. After several sessions, Nicholas felt like a different person. He realized that life continued even without Sarah, that there was a lot of interesting things in the world. It was selfish and foolish to spend time in sorrow, doing nothing. The girl's disappearance was her choice and her right. No person is another's property. She wanted to, she left. She knew where to find Nicholas. If she had wanted to, she would have shown up already. It couldn't be said that Nicholas felt happy. The longing for his beloved was still strong. But at least he had the strength. The young man understood that it was time to act, find a job, settle down. The psychotherapist advised continuing treatment at the clinic, but Nicholas refused. He felt he had received enough help and would manage on his own. Getting a job was not difficult. With his experience, he was hired as a senior economist at a local household appliance trading company. The salary was immediately more than decent. They promised career growth. And Nicholas planned to prove himself. How? He needed to distract himself from sad thoughts. If he stopped, the black melancholy would drag him down again. The young man felt this. Nicholas worked hard and quickly achieved success. Life gradually changed from black and white to colour. First it was dull grey, then bright, full, vibrant. When you have money, the world acquires a special attractiveness. Nicholas could afford a lot and did. Travel, holidays at expensive resorts, beautiful cars. And girls, of course. A young, handsome, wealthy man had no shortage of choices. His mother seemed happy for her son at first. She was truly afraid for his life. The sight of the indifferent man frightened her. But after years, Nicholas's too free lifestyle began to bother her. "You need to get married, son." He heard this phrase more and more often, but he couldn't agree. He was fine the way he was. He felt free and almost happy. Serious relationships. He had been through that and didn't want to repeat. If you love someone, you become so attached that you can't breathe without them. You become fragile and vulnerable. Nicholas still remembered the pain of Sarah's disappearance. No, enough. Love, serious relationships. In his mind, this meant the end of freedom. A person in love no longer belongs to themselves. The object of their feelings can do whatever they want with them. Therefore, at his age, Nicholas didn't even think about marriage. There was plenty of time ahead. He wasn't 40 yet. He would have time if he wanted to. His mother scared him with a lonely old age and no one to give him a glass of water. This argument didn't convince the man. He jokingly replied that he wasn't sure if he would want to drink at such a moment, and giving up a happy bachelor life for a vague prospect was foolish, especially since he had plenty of female companionship. Nicholas tried not to think about Sarah, but she periodically surfaced in his thoughts, in dreams, in girls he met. He had learned to cope with his emotions. He hadn't completely erased her from his heart, but now Sarah didn't prevent him from living. Nicholas had managed to leave her in the past, at least so it seemed to him. All these memories and thoughts flashed through Nicholas's mind the moment he walked towards the bench with the old woman. He saw the bracelet, and in an instant all his feigned nonchalance vanished. He felt the longing for Sarah again and realized that he would give up all his wealth and freedom just to have her by his side. Only the old woman had said that Sarah was no more. Nicholas was afraid to think about it, hoping he had misunderstood something. "So you say you knew my Sally?" The old woman looked at him intently. "Yes," the man nodded. "This bracelet, I think I recognize it. Can I look closer?" The old woman silently took the piece off her wrist and handed it to him. All this time, she didn't take her eyes off him. The man's breath caught when the bracelet was in his hands. It was it, the very same one, there was no doubt, an exquisite original piece. And yet Nicholas looked closely at the heart pendants. Yes, it was true. Their names were engraved on two. The third was decorated with a diamond. "I am that Nicholas." The man handed the bracelet back to its owner. "I gave it to your daughter many years ago." "So this is you," the old woman shook her head. "Sarah was so in love with you then. It had never happened to her before. She was flying on wings. I told her not to get involved with people like that." "Like what?" Nicholas didn't understand. "With sons of rich parents. Rich. We weren't rich then. My mother raised me alone, just like you raised Sarah. But still, you weren't our equal. You studied at university, your mother earned well, and considered everyone poorer, not a match for her son. Maybe she was right, I don't know. Only one problem. She opposed your love with Sally." "I don't understand anything." Nicholas wanted the old woman's face, Sarah's mother's face, to soften. She was clearly resentful. For what? For their happiness, he had flown away, worked hard for 3 years, earned money for an apartment, wanted to propose, but couldn't find her. It was Sarah who had disappeared, run away from him. "You don't understand." The old woman's eyes pierced him through. "Well, maybe you forgot, or didn't know anything." Nicholas shrugged. "I looked for her," he said. "When I came back, I looked everywhere. I went to your place, but other people lived there. I tried to find out at work, even wanted to file a missing person report, but they refused. No one could tell me where Sarah had disappeared to. No one." "Did you talk to your mother?" the old woman clarified. "Yes, she wasn't aware either." Nicholas understood from her words and expression that his mother was involved. Nothing could be changed, but anxiety rose in his heart. Nicholas was worried. His heart was ready to burst. Would he now learn the truth he had sought for so long? The old woman fiddled with the bracelet, staring into the distance, her gaze clouded. She must have been transported to the past. Nicholas wanted to snap her out of her stupor. It was important to know the truth quickly. All these years he had lived in the certainty that he had left the situation in the past. He entertained himself, enjoyed life, worked hard. A chance meeting changed everything, brought out hidden feelings. He felt lost, vulnerable again. It was physically painful not to be able to take Sarah's hand. It was important to hear what had happened after he left as soon as possible. But the old woman sat, her lips stubbornly pressed together, and Nicholas didn't dare disturb her. This was an elderly woman. She had been through something terrible. He needed to give her time to compose herself. "Sally, she loved you very much. You were the most important thing to her," the old woman finally began. "I noticed right away that something was different about her. She started staying late at work too often, and she came home happy, glowing. It was immediately clear to me that it was about a boy. I didn't pry. I knew she would tell me. I just asked her to be careful. I thought it was someone from the crew courting her. And then this." Valerie raised her daughter alone. Originally from a village, she didn't want to live in her small homeland. She put in a lot of effort to break free and settle in the city. It didn't turn out exactly as she dreamed, but it was better than in the village. She planned to go to technical school after school. Nothing came of it. It turned out it wasn't easy to become a student, even at a not particularly prestigious school, without connections and money. Val didn't pass the competition but wasn't upset. She would stay in the city. Her parents gave her money for the first time. Pennies, but her mother and father gave everything they could. The money was enough for a room in a dormitory. Then she got a job as a cleaner in a small shop in the courtyard. She knew how to handle a mop from a young age. The work was familiar. Thus, she had her own source of income, decent compared to village wages. The next year, Val tried to enroll again, and again, failure. She cried, despaired, and decided it wasn't meant to be, probably. Let everything go as it goes. She had work, she had housing, even if rented, she would manage. Years passed. Val grew up. From an awkward teenager, she turned into a pretty young woman. Men started to notice her. Val began to think about family. She wanted to take care of children and a husband, make a cozy home, cook delicious meals. You wouldn't try hard for yourself, cook cabbage soup, bake pies. It was different for a husband and children. You'd always want to please them. And then a suitable candidate came along, Lenny Miller, a loader at the shop. Handsome, cheerful, never discouraged. Of course, not an oligarch, but Val wasn't a princess either. She was aware that a professor's son wasn't in her future. But with Lenny, you wouldn't be lost or bored. He was also from the village. They had a lot in common, something to talk about. Lenny was practical and reliable. With him, you felt like you were behind a stone wall. Lenny proposed quickly. The wedding was symbolic. Without pomp, there was no money. Val had a white dress, not a fancy one, just a light sundress. The young couple, with a couple of friends and the bride's parents, sat in a restaurant, celebrated, and went their separate ways. Lenny had been an orphan since he was 12, raised by his aunt. There was no love there. They raised him to adulthood and pushed him into independent life. He managed as best he could. Valerie dreamed that a happy life would now begin. It was easier to make their way together. They could do it. They rented not just a room, but a separate one-bedroom apartment. They could afford it with 2 salaries. Leonard had far-reaching plans. He intended to buy his own home. Val looked at her husband with hope and pride. If Lenny said there would be an apartment, then it would happen. He wouldn't talk nonsense. Only the plans were not destined to come true. Leonard tried to earn money wherever he could. He freelanced on construction sites, helped unload wagons. He didn't get enough sleep, didn't eat enough. His wife felt sorry for him, urged him to give up the extra work, but he smiled. "We'll earn enough for an apartment, then I'll lie on the couch, but I can't do that yet." Val saw how tired he was. He had lost weight. His face was grey, with circles under his eyes. Her heart sensed that this wouldn't end well. And so it happened. The misfortune occurred at night, while Val was sleeping. Her husband had gone to another odd job. He was supposed to return in the morning, but didn't come. Val became worried and went to the station. There they told her everything. Leonard had finished the work, and they had paid him. He was going home, but walked on the tracks and didn't hear the train. The train operator noticed a man sitting on the tracks too late. It's unclear why he was sitting there, a worker wondered. But Valerie understood everything. Lenny was very tired, exhausted. He must have fallen asleep there, right on the tracks. He didn't make it home, sat down to rest, and passed out. Thus, Valerie became a young widow. She suffered greatly from the loss. With him, her hopes for a family, an apartment, and old age with her beloved disappeared. And during this difficult period, Val suddenly realized she was expecting a child. The news brought both joy and sadness. Joy because Leonard hadn't disappeared without a trace. He would live on in the child. Sadness because how would she manage alone? Her salary barely covered her, and now a baby. Besides, Leonard hadn't managed to find out about the baby. He would have been so happy. After crying from joy, anxiety, and other emotions, Valerie pulled herself together. She would manage. She wasn't completely alone. Her parents in the village would help. But her husband's death wasn't the only blow. Her parents. A tragedy also happened to them. A short circuit occurred in their old house. The wooden dwelling caught fire and they didn't get out. Both died. Valerie still couldn't believe this was happening to her. First her husband, now her parents. No home, no loved ones nearby. She was left completely alone in this uncomfortable, hostile world. She didn't want to drink or eat. She automatically went to work, ate, and talked. But it felt like what was happening was a terrible dream, not real. Sometimes people seemed like actors, houses like cardboard sets. Val saw herself as if from the outside. There were no tears, only a heaviness in her soul. Sometimes panic would wash over her. It was hard to breathe. She would gasp for air. There were spots before her eyes. Then it would pass, and a strange apathy would set in. Valerie lived like this for about 2 months. The feeling of loneliness and uselessness became habitual. Before, her parents and husband had loved her, and she had loved them. And now, why live? The woman began to have bad thoughts. Should she end this meaningless existence? It wasn't difficult. But why stay? For what? For whom? It was precisely at this difficult moment that she felt the first movements of the child beneath her heart. Careful, timid kicks that no mother would mistake. Val had almost forgotten about her pregnancy. So much had fallen upon her. But she wasn't alone. Soon her baby would be born, Leonard's child. Perhaps he would look like him. Val hoped so very much. From then on, the woman pulled herself together. She clearly realized that she would soon be a mother. She had to hold on for the baby's sake, a child. He was not to blame for anything, so fragile, vulnerable. He needed someone to lean on, and that person would be her. Val seemed to wake up from a terrible dream, and set about her business. There was little time left before the birth. Many issues needed to be resolved. She had to get the insurance money for the burned house. It would be enough for maternity leave if she economized. She had to arrange the documents at the women's clinic, start gathering the layette, a stroller, a crib, diapers, undershirts. All these tasks distracted her from heavy thoughts. She began to enjoy life again. She eagerly awaited the baby's arrival. She wanted to look into the familiar face, see the familiar features of her husband and parents, feel that she was not alone again. Valerie, striving to save more money for maternity leave, worked until late in her pregnancy. She washed floors, doing the only thing she knew how to do. She had to carry heavy buckets, bend over, reach. As a result, labour began a little earlier than expected. Val didn't expect it. Nothing had indicated it. The ambulance was called directly to work. From there, she went to the maternity hospital. Several hours of suffering, and they placed her treasure on her chest, a tiny girl. The baby looked strange, wrinkled and purple. The little one was immediately taken to the ward for premature babies. For a while, Val didn't know what was wrong with her. The doctors said nothing, brushed her off. "Anything can happen. What do you expect? You didn't carry to term," a nurse replied irritably. "They don't take care of themselves and then they suffer." What Val went through during those days until the baby's condition stabilized. She had never been so scared. She prayed for only one thing. As long as the girl survived, nothing else mattered. If there were health problems, never mind, they would cope. The main thing was for the baby to live. Valerie couldn't have endured another loss, and Sally survived. She was discharged from the hospital as a completely healthy child, without diagnoses. Only her low weight reminded them of her prematurity. Val thought she would fatten up her daughter, but she remained fragile, almost transparent. However, this looked beautiful and touching. Sarah, as Valerie had hoped, greatly resembled her father, just as clear-eyed, smiling, charming. At times, Lenny's features were so clearly visible that it seemed as if her husband himself was looking at her. This made her heart warmer. It was hard for Valerie alone with a nursing infant. Until Sally was 2.5 years old and went to nursery school, Val couldn't work. Money was only enough for the bare necessities: rent, food, minimal clothing. Sometimes Sally would get sick, and they had to spend money on medicine. Their savings dwindled, the benefits were minimal, and yet the young mother felt happy. She had a daughter, a wonderful girl, smart and beautiful, her pride and joy. Val felt needed and loved again. They say other people's children grow up quickly. Val was convinced this also applied to her own. Time flew by at a dizzying speed. Now Sarah was going to kindergarten. From a tiny baby, she had turned into a princess girl with fluffy pigtails. A change of scene, and Sarah was a first grader. Val still remembered crying at the assembly line, sending her daughter to school. She felt sorry for the child. Now a lot was required of her, sitting through lessons, doing homework. And what if Sally had mean teachers? Val had had them in middle school. Sarah, however, was beaming with happiness at the assembly line. She couldn't wait to grow up, become an adult, to help her mother. The girl saw how hard it was for Val, how her back and legs ached. A few more years flew by like a blur, and now Sarah was a high school student. Her studies weren't great. She tried, Val saw, but it didn't work out. The woman wasn't upset and didn't scold her daughter. Neither Val herself nor Leonard could boast of academic success. Why be surprised? That wasn't the main thing. Sarah had grown up kind, sensitive, attentive, and very wise. In practical terms, in her teenage years, she knew how to save money and could cook a delicious dinner on a minimal budget. This was more important for life than knowing how to solve equations, and what a beauty Sally had become, slender, big-eyed, fair-skinned. Guys turned their heads. Sarah herself didn't notice, but Val saw it and was proud. If only she got a good husband. That meant a lot for a woman. Sarah finished construction technical school and got a job. Her crew consisted mostly of young girls like her. Nothing complicated was required of them, just cleaning up sites after the workers. Val was happy for her daughter. Yes, the work didn't require high qualifications, the pay wasn't very attractive, but Sarah was busy and the work wasn't physically exhausting. And then Sarah fell in love. Valerie understood immediately from her daughter's eyes, from her mysterious smile. Later, Sarah confessed there was a boy, a wonderful one, Nicholas, and they had a serious relationship. When Sarah described her chosen one, her mother became thoughtful. He was out of her league, a student at a prestigious university, son of a well-off mother. Sarah wouldn't fit in. Sally was beautiful, hard-working, but the levels were too different. But Sarah convinced her mother that everything would be fine. The boy was genuinely in love, even talked about marriage. True, he first wanted to buy his own place, for which he needed to spend several years abroad. Even then, Val suspected something. She didn't like it. It seemed Nicholas was messing with her daughter's head, would play with her and leave, go off to have fun, forget Sarah, and she would wait and suffer. She was naive. She believed everything. And then Nicholas left, and then it turned out that Sarah was expecting his child. What a surprise. Valerie insisted on terminating the pregnancy. She didn't believe Nicholas would acknowledge the child. 2 women alone couldn't cope. They were barely making ends meet. Most likely the young man had forgotten about Sally, and she naively thought he would be thrilled. "My foolish child," Valerie shook her head. "I told her to give up her fantasies." Nicholas hung on her every word. "But my daughter stood her ground, said you would be happy to hear such news. True, my girl didn't know how to tell you. Your phone was unavailable. You didn't reply to letters. All this convinced me even more that you had simply run away from Sarah and cut ties. I didn't know who was involved in all this. I only guessed afterwards. Everything finally fell into place just now, after talking to you." "I wrote to Sarah too. I wrote often," Nicholas choked out. "There were problems with communication there, but I wrote letters every evening, and it was she who didn't reply." "No wonder," Val smirked. "Your mother. She must have intercepted your letters and hers, prevented you from communicating. She really disliked her future daughter-in-law, a simple girl." "How do you know?" Nicholas breathed out. "I guessed. It's a pity I didn't guess sooner. But wait, you'll understand yourself soon. Listen." Receiving no reply, Sarah decided to talk to his mother. "Of course, your mother wasn't thrilled. Upon learning about the pregnancy, she became furious. First she screamed at my girl, accusing her of trying to deceive and extort money from relatives. Then she threatened to take the child, as he would be left with a mother who had no money and no place of her own. Of course the child would be given to the prosperous father, and Sarah would be stripped of her rights. Nicholas's mother said many hurtful words to Sarah. She stood there half dead with fear. Sarah was seriously scared for the child then. She already loved him and was afraid of losing him. What if Nicholas's mother carried out her threats? What if she took the baby? It was then that Sarah realized she had to leave the city, far away from the terrible woman capable of anything. And Nicholas. He, as the girl thought then, would no longer support her. According to your mother, you had forgotten all about Sarah, Valerie continued. She said you had found a girl there and that in conversations you didn't ask about Sarah, but only shared details of your new life. This sounded plausible. I also believed, based on her words, that it would turn out that way. Sarah returned after the conversation in tears, sobbing, begging her mother to move. She wanted to hide. She regretted her action. She went to Nicholas's mother for nothing. Nothing good came of it. Well, we moved, Valerie sighed. We settled here in Willow Creek. Why not? Nothing held us in Capital City, no place, no work. So at least in that regard, my daughter and I were free. Sarah wanted to hide. She was very afraid that your mother would carry out her threats and take the child. I didn't believe it, of course, but for my daughter's peace of mind I agreed, and here we are. Mother and daughter quickly settled into the new place. The town was much smaller than Capital City. Life was simpler. Prices were lower, the atmosphere calmer. Exactly on time, Stephen was born, a healthy, strong baby. His grandmother and mother doted on the little one. He reciprocated. It seemed that Stephen understood from infancy how difficult things were for his loved ones and was an ideal child. He slept a lot, ate well, didn't fuss, and was obedient. Everything would have been fine, but money was tight. Valerie and Sarah worked as cleaners, earning pennies that were barely enough for necessities, rent, food, clothing. Stephen didn't have expensive toys, gadgets, or fashionable clothes, but he didn't complain. On the contrary, he assured them that when he grew up, he would buy them everything. Well, we didn't live richly, but happily and peacefully, Valerie continued, tears welling up in her eyes. And then the tragedy, with Sally, like a bolt from the blue. She got sick, didn't go to the doctor, kept working, walked around with a fever, messed with cold water scrubbing floors. She hid it from me until the last moment. I wouldn't have let her, although we needed the money. I noticed when she was completely bedridden. I called an ambulance. She went to the hospital. It immediately turned out to be bilateral pneumonia, advanced. They couldn't save her, so Stephen and I were left alone. Valerie had endured many losses, but Sarah's hit the hardest. Perhaps if it weren't for Stephen, she wouldn't have survived. But she needed to stay strong for her grandson, and Valerie pulled herself together. Again, she worked, cleaned, cooked, and also supported her grandson. It wasn't easy for him either, without a mother at 8 years old. The old woman's story flowed smoothly. Nicholas was overwhelmed by various feelings. His heart ached that Sarah was lost forever. He had gotten used to living without her, but knew she was somewhere, living, feeling, laughing, maybe remembering. And now, this was it. But on the other hand, it seemed he had found a son. Stephen, by all accounts, was his child. Their continuation, his and Sarah's, their future. Why didn't Sarah turn to me for help, even in the hardest times? Nicholas choked out. She knew where to find me. I didn't hide, didn't change my address. I was in Capital City the whole time. We were afraid, Valerie sighed. Your mother. She made it clear that if we made a claim, she would sue for the child. How were we to know you wouldn't be on her side? That's why we hid. How could she think that I would... Nicholas couldn't finish. Tears were overwhelming him, but he didn't want to cry on the bench in front of Sarah's mother. Don't judge, Valerie gently patted his shoulder. We were afraid for Stevie, you understand? And fear is a bad advisor. And Sarah was offended at first because you found someone else there. And then she often looked at your photos on social media, where you were with different girls. But I didn't have anyone there during the internship, Nicholas exclaimed. I worked like a dog to earn money for an apartment as quickly as possible, to live together with Sarah, happily, peacefully. That's fate for you, Valerie shook her head. Fate, you know, is quite a trickster, and even now. What was the probability that we would meet here? Practically zero. And yet here we are sitting on a bench, talking. I want to see my son, Nicholas suddenly said. Stevie, yours. He is mine, isn't he? He is, Valerie smiled. You'll see the boy and all doubts will disappear. Grandma, hi, where are you from? A horseboy's voice was heard from behind Nicholas. The man turned sharply and saw a tall, thin teenager. It was as if lightning struck him. This child. He was the spitting image of Nicholas from his childhood photos, only dressed and haircut differently. The teenager looked at Nicholas with distrust. And here comes Stevie, dear, Valerie smiled. Finished work already? Yes, that's why I came. They paid me well. Let's go home. You don't need to stand here any more today. Stephen apparently hadn't yet understood that Nicholas wasn't just a random passerby. Wait, Valerie hesitated. I want to introduce you to a good person here. This is Nicholas, Uncle Nick. I am your father, Nicholas stated directly and without preparation. The words just came out. He didn't like that Uncle Nick. You... The boy's eyes widened in surprise. His eyebrows shot up to his fringe. The confession shocked the boy, but somewhere deep in his eyes, joy and relief flickered. Several years passed. Valerie and Stephen now lived in Capital City again. Nicholas bought them an apartment next to his. More correctly, all three lived together as one family. Nicholas was still not speaking to his mother. Then, after meeting Valerie and getting acquainted with Stephen, he returned to Capital City and went to his parent. They had a long, difficult conversation. His mother hadn't expected such a turn. And who could have thought? She didn't know what had happened to Sarah. She wasn't interested if a child had been born. All these years, she believed she had done the right thing, saved her only child from a greedy girl, prevented her from ruining his fate. At first, his mother denied it, didn't want to admit that she had treated Sarah abominably, didn't talk about the intercepted letters. That old woman spun you a yarn to dump her grandson on your neck, and you fell for it, and this boy, the probability that he's yours is minimal. Nicholas could have argued a lot. Stephen was his, there was no doubt. Nicholas had an official document confirming paternity, a DNA test. Not because he doubted. Stephen was too much like him in childhood. The test was needed for official adoption, and Nicholas, of course, intended to take Stevie under his wing. The boy had lived in unsuitable conditions for so many years. Now that was over. Nicholas pleaded with his mother for a long time to tell the truth. She dodged, avoided answering, so he guessed everything from her behaviour. But then his mother burst out. She called Sarah and Valerie terrible names, described her son's horrible future if he had tied his fate to a pauper. Nicholas looked at his mother and pressed his lips together. His dearest, closest person. She had dedicated her whole life to him, done so much, helped him become someone. And it was his mother who had once destroyed his happiness with her own hands. Nicholas tried not to think about what would have happened if, upon returning, he had found Sarah in Capital City. Stephen would have been about 2 years old. Of course they would have gotten married, bought the apartment they dreamed of, and lived happily. In a couple of years, Stephen would have had a brother or sister. Sarah would have been alive. Nicholas hadn't spoken to his mother for about 2 years now, but he wasn't the one who initiated the silence. His mother was offended herself. She was outraged that her son didn't appreciate her contribution to his future, and she also tried to forbid him, a grown, established man, from communicating with Stephen and Valerie. Upon learning that her son was formalizing paternity, the woman became furious. "What are you doing? Have you completely lost your mind? You're going to put your mistress's son around your neck, and his grandmother too. How do you know whose he is? Who knows what genes the boy has? You'd be better off marrying a decent woman with a child, since you want a family so much." She said many unpleasant, angry things about Stephen and Valerie. Nicholas tried to appease his mother, to explain his perspective. It was useless. The elderly woman reacted to any mention of her grandson like a bull to a red rag. She lost her temper, became irritated, and swore. Nicholas felt sorry for his mother, but he wasn't going to abandon the child to satisfy her whims, especially since he and his son had immediately taken to each other, and so his mother took offense and stopped communicating. He periodically made attempts at reconciliation. He knew that sooner or later his parent, despite her strong character, would soften. And for now he had plenty to do. They had so much to catch up on with Stephen. Son and father now often went on vacation, sometimes to the sea, sometimes to the mountains. The teenager sincerely admired the world, eagerly absorbing impressions. Son and father talked a lot. Stephen turned out to be an interesting, wise beyond his years conversationalist. Now that the boy didn't have to work, his studies improved. At the prestigious gymnasium where Nicholas enrolled him, he quickly became one of the best students. Valerie was always there too. And how could it be otherwise? She had raised Stephen for so many years. Grandmother and grandson were the closest. Of course, they couldn't be separated. Nicholas's personal life also improved. Finally, he met a woman, interesting and kindred in spirit. She didn't resemble the flighty beauties from his past life. Catherine worked as an accountant. She was raising a son from her first marriage alone, the same age as Stephen. The boys quickly hit it off, which was great. Now those were boys! Nicholas smiled, watching the teenagers enthusiastically discussing or fixing a bicycle. It seemed they would become a strong, friendly family. Catherine immediately became friends with Stephen and with Valerie too. Peace, harmony, tranquility, mutual support. Nicholas felt warm and light in his heart. And his mother would understand in time. She herself wasn't happy with her stubbornness anymore. Nicholas noticed it. Sooner or later his mother would thaw. That time wasn't far off. No one held a grudge against her anymore. Only, perhaps, it was difficult for his mother to understand this. Never mind, everything would work out.